Gambling is one of the most forbidden activities in our Islamic religion, and the reason is simple. Because winning depends on luck, which makes it a dangerous field that can cause addiction, loss of money, and completely destroy a person's life. However, a team of students from MIT, one of the strongest universities in the world, would break the equation of luck using a brilliant method. It would transform gambling games from mere chance into a predetermined outcome in their favor, and they would challenge gambling halls and casinos on their own turf, earning millions from them, all without breaking the law. So what was this brilliant method they used, and how did they manage to outsmart the casinos for years without being discovered? Follow the story and enjoy. Our story begins in 1992, specifically at one of the world's strongest universities, the American MIT. Throughout its history, this university remained among the world's top 5 universities, and in many years was ranked first. Naturally, the students studying at this university were the elite of the elite. This university would only accept the best. From this university would emerge the team of students who would challenge the casinos and gambling halls on their own turf. The founder of this team wasn't actually a student, but rather a professor at the university. This professor's real name and image were never fully revealed, but they called him Mr. M. Mr. M was a computer science professor at MIT, meaning he was a genius in both technology and mathematics, and he would become the leader, mastermind, and founder of this operation. Mr. M had a passion for one of the gambling games called Blackjack, which is one of the most famous gambling games. Initially, you might feel this game is just a game of chance, but if you're skilled in mathematics, you'll quickly understand that you can play this game in a way that tips the odds and probabilities in your favor using a method called card counting. You might have seen scenes before, whether in movies or online, where you see a group of players sitting at a table with a dealer in the middle distributing cards. This is the game of blackjack. What makes this game special is that the more cards are dealt throughout the rounds, the more ability you have to count the remaining cards in the deck. And through counting these remaining cards, you can make the winning probabilities lean in your favor using some mathematical calculations. Don't worry, I'll explain this game more throughout the video, and the picture will become clear to you, God willing. By the way, this card counting method wasn't considered an illegal move, and no one could accuse you of cheating if you did it after all. This method is just mathematical calculations in your head. But of course, casinos have monitors and security personnel who watch the games and players, and if they notice someone using the card counting method, they'll immediately kick them out of the casino. You might ask how they can notice such a thing when it's just mathematical calculations in someone's head. The answer will come later when we get into the detailed explanation of the game. But now, let's return to Mr. M. Mr. M wasn't the person who invented the card counting method in blackjack. There were people before him who used this method, and there was even a mathematician who wrote an entire book about it. But Mr. M would put his special touch on this method and implement it better than anyone before him, because this time he would do it with a team whose members were all mathematics geniuses. Mr. M had a passion for blackjack and the card counting method, and he spent several years studying this method, experimenting with it, and mastering it from A to Z. After he felt he had completely mastered all aspects, he decided it was time to start forming his dream team. In 1992, gambling commerce in America was at its peak of prosperity, and new casinos were opening everywhere. Of course, the center and major hub of this vice was Las Vegas, the gambling city. Mr. M felt this was the right time to start forming his team, and he would personally supervise the team members, train them himself, and make them a team that was competent in all aspects. What made it even more exciting was that a new casino had opened in a location close to them near the university, so they could use it as a training ground before going to the bigger casinos in Las Vegas. But before all this, he needed people to help him establish the team, because this team would need management and would need capital. They couldn't gamble and make money if they didn't have money to begin with. He estimated they would need at least $500,000 to be able to make worthwhile money, so they needed to find investors. Mr. M sat with two of his close friends and discussed the matter with them, and their idea was to establish a real company, a company with management, an accountant, and that paid taxes. They wanted to establish an entity that operated legally after all. What they were going to do, as we said, wasn't considered illegal. If they established a company, everyone would have their rights guaranteed, even the players, and consequently, it would be easier for them to attract investors, and it would be an organized entity with management working in a clear manner. Indeed, they established this company and registered it officially, naming it Strategic Investment. This was their company name, and the founding partners who registered in this company in the official papers were Mr. M and his friends Bill and John. These were the management, and in the official papers, they wrote that the company's goal was to apply mathematical analysis for profit in the game of blackjack, meaning official work, clearly stating their goals and objectives. As we said, what they were doing wasn't considered illegal. The presence of these three founders, who had a reputation in the scientific community and had friends and acquaintances, immediately attracted investments, and they were easily able to gather capital worth $500,000 and more within a short period. Of course, any profits they made had to be distributed in clear proportions to the management, investors, and players. In their official papers, the profit percentages were distributed as shown before you: 45% for management, 45% for investors, and 10% for players. Of course, some might see these percentages as unfair, especially since the players would be on the front lines, but the players would have salaries in addition to this 10% profit share, small salaries, that is. So they divided the profits in this way, and whoever wanted to join them was welcome, and whoever didn't want to could move on. This was their way of thinking. Of course, their goal was to recruit students as players, and naturally, they would look for students who had intelligence in mathematics, and of course, all the students in this university were smart in mathematics. But the second quality they needed was students who had courage and could focus even with many distractions around them. Because when they would be in the casino, there would be many distractions, chaos, and noise, in addition to the pressure of playing and the concentration required to do the mathematical calculations. Amidst all these distractions, their minds needed to stay active and focused to calculate these mathematical equations, and this required ability beyond just being smart at mathematics. So the plan was to do something like a general recruitment of students, take large numbers of them, and begin filtering these students to take the best among them. The news initially spread through flyers distributed around the university, and then the students themselves began passing the news among each other. Some of these students already knew about the card counting method, or at least had heard about it, so as soon as they saw the advertisement or heard this news, they were drawn to it. Some liked the idea that they would earn money after all. These were students with no source of income, so they always welcomed anything that could make money, especially if it was something fun and gave them a chance to use their intelligence and skills. Approximately 40 students decided to attend the first meeting that Mr. M held in one of the classrooms. There, Mr. M began explaining to them the idea and the principles they would work on. He clarified that this would take time and months of training to reach the mastery stage. He told them this wouldn't be easy and that many of them would likely withdraw. He told them that anyone who didn't take this seriously would be immediately excluded because this wasn't a game. There was investment and capital worth $500,000 at stake. He explained that everything would proceed legally, with a company, official papers, accounts, and everything perfectly organized. Of course, most students knew about blackjack and knew about the card counting method, even if in a simple way, so explaining the concept wasn't difficult, especially since they were all mathematics geniuses. Now, for us to continue with the story, you also need to understand how this game is played. I won't explain all the game details to avoid complicating things, but I'll give you a simplified explanation. This game has a dealer and players. The dealer distributes cards to the players and to themselves, and the players play against the dealer, not against each other. The goal of the game, in brief, is to have cards whose total numbers are higher than the dealer's cards, but at the same time not higher than 21. For example, if your cards total 20 and the dealer's cards total 17, then you're the winner and will double your bet money. But if either you or the dealer has cards totaling above 21, they automatically lose. Same applies to other players at the table. All players play against the dealer. Whoever among them has a card total higher than the dealer but less than 21 doubles their gambling money. Of course, the more money a player bets, the more they win if they win, and conversely, if they lose, their loss will be bigger. In this game, the player plays directly against the casino because their opponent is the dealer, and the dealer is a casino employee. When the dealer loses, they give the player money from the casino. This game can continue for several rounds, and in each round, the dealer deals more cards to the players and to themselves. So as we progress in the game, with each passing round, fewer cards remain in the dealer's deck, and this is where the card counting method comes in. If you as a player calculate the total of cards that have been dealt in their categories, you'll know the value of the cards remaining in the dealer's deck, and with quick mathematical calculations, you can predict if the coming rounds will be in your favor or not. To simplify it, if your mathematical calculations tell you that most of the remaining cards in the dealer's deck are high denominations, then bet more money, and if most of the remaining cards in the deck are low denominations, then bet less money. This is the basic principle in simplified form. For example, if your calculations tell you that the remaining cards in the deck are of high denominations, you can expect that the dealer might draw a high card for themselves and exceed a total of 21, automatically losing, and you win. Of course, card counting isn't a guaranteed method for winning every game, but when you count cards, the winning probabilities will lean more in your favor. You might lose some rounds, but because the probabilities are in your favor, you should, by the end of the week or month, after having played a large number of games and rounds, come out overall with a nice profit. This game differs from other gambling games because each round depends on the previous round. The more cards we draw from the deck, the better we can predict upcoming rounds because we can predict the cards remaining in the deck. So we can mathematically make the winning probabilities lean in our favor instead of it being just blind luck. This is a very simplified explanation of the game and the card counting method. The topic is more complex and the game has more rules, but at least I want you to understand the basic principles to understand the story. And of course, whoever wants to delve deeper into this aspect can research on their own. The important thing is that Mr. M explained the card counting method to the students in detail, and even some students, as we said, had actually heard of the method or learned a bit about it. But of course, none of them had delved into it like Mr. M had. So Mr. M began explaining to the students all the equations and tables they needed to memorize and apply while using the card counting method. It became like they were studying an additional subject at the university. The topic had equations, tables, and numbers, and this was just the theoretical part. Above all this, there was the practical part they needed to train in applying these methods and techniques. They needed to be able to count cards and do all the mathematical equations automatically without even thinking, especially under the pressure and noise present in casinos. Of course, to reach this stage, they needed months of training, and this is what Mr. M did with them. He would have them train for long hours every day, and the plan was that they would continue this way for a full 6 months. And after 6 months, there would be a practical exam, and it would be a tough exam. Mr. M was literally treating the subject as if it were one of the hardest courses at the university, and this is what caused approximately half the students to withdraw. They couldn't handle all this pressure, especially with their real study pressure. But at the same time, there were students who were very enthusiastic about the subject from the beginning, and this is what made them excel and learn quickly. But in reality, learning and applying the card counting method wasn't the hardest part of the operation. The hardest part was working together as a team, because this was absolutely essential to bypass casino security. True, what they were doing wasn't considered illegal, and the casinos couldn't even accuse them of cheating. But the security guards who monitored the games, if they noticed someone using the card counting method, they would immediately expel them and ban them from entering the casino again. Dealing with casino security was actually the hardest part. You know that these casinos and gambling halls were initially run by mafia gangs and organized crime. They were the ones managing them. So if they found people trying to cheat or trying to work around the rules, they wouldn't just expel them, no. They would take them and beat them up to make an example of them so no one would think of doing the same. But of course, later these casinos became official companies operating under state laws, just like any other business. And while they can't take people outside and beat them up anymore, what hasn't changed is the strength of their security. Security personnel are spread throughout these casinos, monitoring everything, every game. Every table has surveillance cameras. If they suspect you're doing something suspicious, they can monitor all your movements, and you might end up on the blacklist and be banned from entering that casino forever. They have detailed databases of everyone who enters, their picture, specifications, appearance, and name. But the question is, how can casino security detect people who use the card counting method? After all, card counting is just mathematical calculations in a person's mind. They don't have any tool or obvious way they're cheating with. So how can they detect it? First, anyone who gambles with large amounts will attract security's attention, especially if they start winning. When you as a player use the card counting method, in the beginning, in the first rounds, you're supposed to bet small or modest amounts. As cards are dealt and fewer cards remain in the deck, that's when you determine through your calculations whether the remaining cards will be in your favor or not. If the remaining cards are in your favor, you're supposed to start increasing your bet to win more money. And when the remaining cards aren't in your favor, you're supposed to decrease your bet. So to win, you'll keep raising and lowering your bet noticeably between rounds. This pattern and sudden, significant change in your bet value, going up and down, will attract attention, especially if you start winning when you place high bets. Casino security and the monitors they employ, when they notice someone doing this pattern, immediately know they're counting cards. While they're not cheating, the casino has the authority to expel anyone from the casino, even without cause. So just by suspecting you, even if they're not sure, they'll expel you, especially if you're winning large amounts at their expense. That's why Mr. M knew from the beginning of forming his team that he would need a method to help him outsmart casino security and monitors. This method was simply teamwork, a very simple method, but at the peak of intelligence. The idea was that most students or team members would play a role called the counter. The counter's job was to go to a specific table and play like any normal person, with all their bets being small, like $10 or $20 in that range. During the game, the counter uses the card counting method and will play several rounds. After a few rounds pass, when the mathematical calculations indicate it's now an opportunity and they should raise the bet, they give a signal to their colleague standing nearby. This colleague is called the gorilla. Why? Because the person with the money will call them the high roller, because we call rich people high rollers. The high roller is the person who has the money and places high bets. The high roller comes and joins the same table, and it's normal in blackjack for someone to join mid-game after all. You're not playing against other players. You're playing against the dealer who represents the casino, so it's fine to enter mid-game. The high roller comes and suddenly places a large bet, puts down $10,000, for example, because their colleague, the counter, who was at the table counting cards, knew this was an appropriate moment to enter. Here, casino security won't be able to notice that someone is counting cards because the person who is counting the counter has steady and small bets, not going up and down with bets. And the person who suddenly came and placed a high bet, the high roller, only gambles with large amounts anyway. Any table they sit at, their bets are always high when they put money down. So similarly here, the casino doesn't see the high roller going up and down with their bets. This is just their nature, gambling with large amounts. This makes it much harder for casino security and monitors to detect the card counting that's happening. So the students' task was more complex than just learning how to count cards. They also had to learn teamwork, how to work together, and how to do all this amid the pressure, noise, and security monitoring in the casino. Just imagine the situation in a casino. You're playing among other players, noise around you everywhere, commotion, music, people talking, gambling machines operating, people playing at tables around you, players who might talk to you at any moment, surveillance cameras above your head, monitors and security personnel around you everywhere. Amid all these conditions, you must keep your mind clear and completely focused, ensuring you're counting cards and doing your mathematical calculations without any mistakes, because any small error could cost large amounts of money. And above all this, you must pay attention to your teammates' signals, and you might need to give signals to your teammates yourself if you're the counter. That's why Mr. M subjected his students to very harsh training and tests that only the elite would pass. Of course, before these tests, he taught them and studied all the details from mathematical calculations to teamwork. After 6 months of study and training came the time for practical tests. Mr. M would put students under conditions of noise, commotion, and distractions that simulated casino atmospheres, and even harder, and amid these conditions, he would test them. He tried to create the same atmosphere and pressure they might face in reality. Amid these distractions and noise, he would start dealing cards, and the student under test had to count cards and keep their mind working on mathematical calculations without a single mistake. If the student could count cards correctly while under this pressure, then they passed the test. But even if they passed one test, it didn't mean they were qualified. They had to pass multiple times consecutively. It wasn't acceptable to pass once and fail once, then pass once and fail once. No, they had to succeed after success, at minimum, to become qualified. Mr. M was creative with the conditions and distractions he put the students under. He would even pour ice on them. He showed no mercy. Naturally, some students were faster than others in adapting to these conditions. Among these students, we'll mention 3 by name. The first is Simon, the second is Dan, and the third is Katie. These 3 students would have a bigger role in the story than others, so keep them in mind. Of course, these 3 weren't the only ones who passed Mr. M's tests. There were about 12 students in total who managed to pass the tests and became qualified to work on the team. Interestingly, Salmon was the only student who passed Mr. M's tests on his first attempt, making him arguably the best among them. He was particularly skilled at card counting because he had actually researched it before learning from Mr. M. After Mr. M selected the students who would be on the team, he decided it was time for their first practical experience. There was a nearby casino called Foxwood, which Mr. M chose as their first testing ground. Since it was their first time, they wouldn't be gambling with large amounts, literally just the minimum bet of $5 per round. During this first trial, results varied from student to student. Some made nice profits while others lost, though these losses weren't due to poor play. As I mentioned before, card counting didn't guarantee winning every time. It just ensured the odds were in your favor. This didn't mean you would always win. It's a game of probability. You might lose several rounds, games, or even go through days, weeks, or months of losses. But theoretically, if you continued playing, you should start winning because the overall probability was in your favor when using this method. This is what mathematicians call the law of large numbers. On that first practical day, while some team members lost, the team as a whole made a nice profit. They repeated these practical training sessions several times at the same casino. After Mr. M felt the team was ready and the students were prepared, he decided it was time to target the big goals, the Las Vegas casinos. There, they would use their real money, the $500,000 they had managed to raise from investors. In September 1992, the student team made their first trip to Las Vegas. Since Salmon was among the best students, Mr. M trusted him with a large amount of money, approximately $150,000. Salmon would be the hammer, high roller who would bet large amounts. He had to keep this money on him at all times, so he literally hid it in his jacket rather than putting it in a bag or anywhere that might be away from him. Salmon's flight was delayed compared to the rest of the team members because preparing the money took longer than expected. The other students had gone ahead to Las Vegas since they had booked their tickets in advance, and Salmon had to wait until Mr. M could prepare the cash. Mr. M kept giving him the same warnings. Don't drink alcohol, focus on the game, and don't let anything distract you. He would tell him, Las Vegas is a flashy city designed to distract and enchant people, but you're going there with a purpose, so focus on your goal. When Salmon took the next available flight to Las Vegas and arrived, he was immediately dazzled by the lights, the noise, the people, and the atmosphere. He felt like he had entered a different world, which made him even more excited about the adventure he was about to experience. The team had agreed that their first target would be a casino in a hotel called the Mirage, one of Las Vegas's most famous hotels. This hotel had a small volcano next to it, and they were supposed to meet by this volcano. These were Mr. M's instructions. However, when Salmon arrived at the location, he couldn't find anyone. He spent time looking for them around the area, but to no avail. At that time, mobile phones weren't widespread. This was still 1992, so he had no way to contact them. Finally, after searching for about an hour, he decided to enter the casino alone. After walking around a bit, he found Kitty by herself. When he asked her where the rest of the team was, she told him everyone had gone in different directions after waiting for him for a while and decided to explore the place. Since Salmon was the hammer with the money, none of them could gamble without him. Now it was just him and Kitty, so they made a plan to gamble together without needing the rest of the team. In the end, 2 people were enough to execute the operation, one to be the counter and one to be the hammer. Salmon and Kitty decided to play characters, which was one of Mr. M's instructions. Salmon would pose as a Russian arms dealer, even speaking with a Russian accent. He was actually of Russian descent, while Kitty would play the role of his American wife. Taking on personas was something Mr. M had recommended because it allowed them to blend better into the casino environment. For instance, it would be natural for a Russian arms dealer to come and gamble with large amounts of money. They went to one of the blackjack tables and sat down. Salmon took out $10,000 and gave it to the dealer who was running the table. The dealer took the money and exchanged it for chips, circular pieces that serve as casino currency. You first have to buy these chips and play with them. You can't gamble with cash directly. When you finish playing in the casino, you exchange these chips back for real money. The dealer took Salmon's $10,000, gave him the chips, and then started dealing the cards. In the first few rounds, Salmon bet small amounts, wanting the rounds to progress so he could start counting cards and see where the probabilities were heading. The game proceeded, but initially the numbers weren't in their favor. The high cards had been dealt, and the lower cards remained in the deck. As I explained before, in such a situation, the probabilities aren't in your favor as a player. They continued counting cards round after round until the mathematical calculations would tell them that the probabilities were in their favor. When the probabilities aren't favorable, it's better for the hammer, the person with the money, to step away and let the counter play instead. So Salmon, who was playing the role of the hammer, got up from the table saying he needed to go to the bathroom, and Kitty, who was supposedly his wife, stayed in his place. At this point, Kitty would play the role of the counter and would only bet small amounts, since her husband, who had the money, had gone to the bathroom, so it made sense that she would play with smaller amounts until Salmon returned. Of course, Salmon wasn't really going to the bathroom. He would return and watch the table from a slight distance. Kitty bet the minimum possible amount each round, which was $25 according to this casino's rules, while simultaneously counting cards and calculating probabilities mathematically using the method Mr. M had taught them. Kitty would continue playing and counting, while Salmon watched from afar until the probabilities turned in their favor. At this point, Kitty was supposed to give him a signal to return to the table. They had agreed on specific signals. If she put her face on her left hand, it meant the probabilities were good. If she put her face on her right hand, it meant the probabilities were excellent. And if she put her face on both hands, it meant the probabilities were incredibly in their favor and he needed to come immediately. The signals were very simple, but extremely clever. No one could notice or understand them except the people who had agreed upon them. As soon as Salmon saw this signal from her, he returned to the table immediately. When he sat down, he put all his money or chips on this round, and because the probabilities were incredible, they kept winning round after round and tripled their money. The $10,000 turned into $30,000. Of course, when a player starts winning such amounts, they attract the attention of security monitors and casino managers. One of these monitors immediately approached Salmon and Kitty's table and started talking to them. Salmon initially thought they might be kicked out, but this manager surprised him by asking if they were staying at the hotel. When Salmon said they hadn't booked a room at any hotel yet, the manager said, "You're a big winner, and we like to treat our big clients specially, so I'd like to offer you a suite in the hotel." Salmon was surprised by the offer but immediately responded, "Well, that's nice, thank you, we'll accept the offer." Of course, casinos don't make these gestures out of the kindness of their hearts. They do it to keep players around longer, increasing the likelihood that they'll gamble with their winnings again and usually have a greater chance of losing. They make this move hoping to get their money back. When Salmon and Kitty went up to the suite, they saw a room they had never dreamed of entering, a luxurious 5-star suite. With their money and profits in hand, they knew from that moment their lives would change 180 degrees. Imagine that during that first trip, in just 2 days, they managed to win more than $100,000 in a single weekend. From there, their operation grew and grew. Weekdays were for studying, but every weekend, the team would take the first flight to Vegas and repeat the same operation. The students playing the role of counters would spread out across tables, betting minimum amounts and counting cards, while the hammers with the money waited for signals from a distance. Despite their careful and clever method, security always kept an eye on big winners, and when the same faces appeared week after week, it started raising suspicions. That's why the team didn't focus on a single casino. They varied and went to different casinos each weekend. Every weekend, they'd fly to Las Vegas, gamble for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday night. After finishing their work, they'd go to parties, drink, and live the Vegas life. Then they'd return to Cambridge and continue the rest of the week as normal students at MIT. Mr. M and the founding partners, Bill and John, who established this company with him, were careful to keep all their accounts precise. Each team member had to submit a clear report of all profits and money won or lost during the week, and profits were distributed based on these calculations. As mentioned before, the largest share went to management at 45%, Mr. M and partners Bill and John. Then investors also at 45%, while players received a small salary plus 10% of their personal profits. Those who lost or didn't make profits would only get the very small base salary, while those who won more would get more money. They calculated these accounts precisely every week and distributed profits accordingly. Their operations continued this way for several months, and they diversified as much as possible among casinos to reduce attention and suspicion. They didn't limit themselves to Las Vegas. They expanded to casinos in other American cities and sometimes even traveled to Europe, meaning they had great diversity in their targets. All of this was under Mr. M's guidance and planning. All students and team members were successful, and even if some occasionally suffered large losses, the final outcome was usually profitable. Even those who lost one day might win more than they lost the next. Even if they had a week or two of losses, the following weeks would balance things out. As we said, this is the law of large numbers. Salmon was undisputedly the team's best player. No one achieved the profits he did. Imagine that once he won $75,000 in a single round, not one game, but one round. His performance was phenomenal. Of course, to achieve such performance, he needed to bet larger amounts than his colleagues, but his self-confidence was always well placed. Within about 6 months, the team's overall profits approached $1 million in net profit. Even though the students weren't earning as much as management and investors, they were enjoying their situation, living a life they never dreamed of at their young age. They were living a life of luxury between fancy hotels, upscale restaurants, first-class trips, and tickets to the biggest shows and events. Wherever they went, they were treated like kings because in Las Vegas, wealthy people who love to gamble are like gold mines for casinos. All this treatment was to encourage these wealthy people to gamble at their establishments. Usually, casinos come out winning from this equation, but with the student team, this equation was completely different. The students had the upper hand. So not only were they taking money from casinos through Blackjack, they were also getting rooms, food, shows, and events at the casino's expense. One of the craziest things a team member did was convincing one of the casino hotels to sponsor his wedding, and not just any hotel, but Caesar's Palace, one of Las Vegas's most luxurious and famous hotels. During these passing months, Mr. M and his partners were training new groups of students. They weren't satisfied with just their current group. They wanted to expand the team further. Indeed, the team grew to 20 members, then 30, and at its peak reached about 40 members. Mr. M and his partners treated this company like a real business, and the more successful they became, the more they tried to expand. There were some internal problems that would occur sometimes, especially with students who weren't happy with the profit distribution ratios. As mentioned, students only received 10% of profits despite doing most of the work, so some would occasionally demand their percentage be increased. But Mr. M and the founders weren't interested. Whoever didn't like the arrangement could leave and even start their own team if they could. Important students like Salmon, Dan, and Kate were making good money because they earned good profits, as we said. Each student took 10% of the profits they personally generated, so each one earned according to their work. The team was operating at high efficiency, and total profits exceeded $1 million, which at that time was worth more than today in today's value. It might reach about $2.5 million, a respectable amount. Most importantly, they were doing everything legally even if caught. They wouldn't go to jail. The worst that could happen was being banned from the casino where they were caught. Unfortunately for them, casino security did start to notice. Even though the team always varied which casinos they targeted, the security teams and surveillance groups at these casinos were very tough and highly sophisticated. The gambling industry is one of the most profitable, and casinos invest enormous amounts to secure their profits. Imagine that there were even independent investigators who moved from casino to monitor suspicious players, especially those who won large profits repeatedly and consistently. These investigators would create complete files on these players and distribute them to various casinos. The student team members noticed a particular person who was always following them, his face appearing at more than one casino, a man with gray hair. At first, they thought he was just a security manager or regular monitor, but when they noticed him at multiple casinos, they knew he wasn't an ordinary person. Indeed, this person was named Andy Anderson, and he was an investigator specializing in casino security, working for himself. He wasn't employed by any specific casino, but worked for an independent company called Griffin that provided security services to various casinos. Imagine how huge this industry must be for there to be a security company specialized in providing only security services. The important thing about this Griffin company was that it provided lists of names and photos of people considered threats to the casino business. The role of investigators like Andy Anderson was to catch cheaters and people trying to deceive casinos. This investigator was the first person to notice the movements of the MIT students' team. He began following them from casino to casino, analyzing their behavior to understand how they carried out their operations. Of course, he couldn't immediately connect them all together because their numbers were large, but he would take their photos and start looking for connections between them. Each time he would uncover a new member and add them to the group, creating something like a list. From the beginning of his surveillance, it was clear they weren't cheating. If they weren't cheating, it meant they were using card counting techniques. He spent more than 2 months monitoring them and reviewing security camera footage to understand their operation mechanism. It didn't take long before he understood everything: the role of the counters, the role of the big players, and how they signaled each other. He connected all the dots and understood their method. Once he understood what was happening, he began directing casino security to stop any team member they saw. Security would interrupt them mid-game. Sammy's character, who was playing the role of a Russian arms dealer, was exposed. When security confronted him, he tried to tell them he wasn't doing anything wrong, and when they insisted, he said he'd take his money and leave. Still, they wouldn't let him leave. It was like dealing with gangsters, as I mentioned before. These casinos started as gangster operations, and even though they transformed into legal companies and institutions, they never lost that gangster character. They took Sammy to one of the back rooms and threatened him there, telling him not to think he was clever just because he wasn't breaking the law. What he was doing was considered fraud, and he would be permanently banned from entering the casino. If he tried to enter again, he would be arrested, and they would call the police because he would be trespassing on their private property. This was all they could do to him: ban him from entering the casino again, and they had to exchange his chips for money because, in the end, he hadn't done anything illegal. He hadn't cheated. Of course, catching one of them meant their entire team and operation might have been exposed, and this was confirmed in the following days when they caught Dan. Dan was a big player like Sammy and was one of the biggest winners. He was immediately targeted by casino security and caught. Keep in mind, this was at a different casino from where Sammy was caught, meaning their operation had become widely known. Imagine that even when they went to Europe, specifically to Monte Carlo, they were caught. The police were called, and they were threatened and told that card counting was illegal. Of course, This was nonsense because card counting is actually impossible to prove against the accused, it's just calculations in the mind. What was clear was that the noose was tightening around them. The issue had even reached European casinos. Wherever they went, they expected to be caught. The reason behind all this was the Griffin Security Company, the company of the investigator we talked about. This company, as we mentioned, specialized in casino security and published a regularly updated book. This book was called the Griffin Book, and it was a long list of names, photos, and data of all persons considered a threat to casinos, meaning cheaters and fraudsters. Most of the student team members were added to this book, their names, photos, descriptions, and the aliases they used. They didn't have their real names, by the way, because the students never used their real names and always assumed characters, like Sammy, who assumed the character of a Russian arms dealer. This book was distributed to casinos around the world. Any casino that subscribed or paid Griffin would immediately receive their book, and casinos would receive book updates regularly via fax. Among the updates that Griffin Company would send were player movements. If a suspicious player was spotted in any casino, warnings would be sent to neighboring casinos or casinos in the same city. The warning would include the person's photo, name, and characteristics. Andy, the investigator who exposed the student team, wasn't satisfied with just exposing them to the casinos. He also wanted to discover their secret, where these people came from, and how they executed their operations with such precision. Among the information available to the casinos were these students' addresses, because some weren't careful and used their real addresses for hotels and casinos. The casinos would give them free tickets and offers because they had money, so to send them these tickets and offers, they needed a real address to send them to. The investigator noticed that almost all their addresses were in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where MIT was located. The investigator quickly realized they were students at this university. He even later obtained the university's yearbook, which contained photos and names of all students. He compared the photos in the book with the photos he had and was able to find their real names, which were then added to the Griffin book. The student team and their leader, Mr. M, immediately noticed that they were being stopped and turned away consistently whenever they entered any casino. They knew it was clear they had been identified. At this point, some of them tried to disguise themselves and change their appearance. Sammy, for example, tried to play the role of a person in a wheelchair. One team member named John literally tried to disguise himself as a woman, wearing a wig and makeup. Some tried to grow their beards or mustaches, and others tried wearing different outfits and varying their disguise methods. However, most of these disguises were quickly discovered, especially since the casinos were using facial recognition programs that could identify a person as soon as they entered the casino through cameras. Imagine that we're talking about 1993, and casinos had this modern technology. That's why I tell you that casinos were among the most advanced institutions in terms of security. The disguises the students used usually didn't work because facial recognition programs would scan this part of the face. So even if you wore a wig, grew a beard, or put on makeup, this part of the face would remain the same, you couldn't change it. Most disguises didn't work, and things started deteriorating from bad to worse when the team began experiencing bad luck. We mentioned that sometimes they could have periods of losses that might continue for more than a week, but the situation was supposed to balance out afterward, and they would end up winning in the end. Unfortunately, suddenly the losses started accumulating, especially since the old students, who were more professional like Sammy, Dan, and Katie, couldn't play freely anymore because they were immediately expelled from most casinos they entered. So the ones playing more were the new students that Mr. M was bringing in, whose faces hadn't been exposed yet. Apparently, these new students weren't up to the level, so there were big losses in hundreds of thousands, reaching nearly $500,000 in continuous losses over 3 months. Problems gathered from all sides, casino security on one side, bad luck on another, and to complete the party, tensions started rising between management and students, especially since the students weren't earning anything because everything was losses, and even if they won a little, their share was very trivial. This led to creating a state of congestion among the students and might have even contributed to these losses they were suffering from. In the end, this led to many of them leaving and abandoning the team. Mr. M and the management were very scattered, and Mr. M in particular was one of those people who collapse under pressure and tension. Imagine that one day he forgot a bag on the floor in one of the classrooms, and this bag contained $150,000 of company money. He went home and slept, not remembering the bag until the middle of dawn. When they returned to the university to look for the bag, they didn't find it and later discovered that the janitor had found it and handed it to the guards, who in turn handed it to the police. Imagine that a federal investigation was opened into this money to verify its source, whether this money was clean or if it was money laundering and suspicious funds. It took a long time before Mr. M and his company could recover these funds. This situation made many students and team members lose respect for Mr. M despite his intelligence or typically brilliant planning. It was clear that he had collapsed miserably under the pressure and continuous losses, and it was clear that there wouldn't be a solution to their current situation. Imagine that things reached the point where Mr. M's partners, Bill and John, met alone and discussed the idea of expelling Mr. M from the company and team he himself founded and putting Sammy in charge. They actually offered this to Sammy, but Sammy immediately refused because first, this would be a betrayal of Mr. M, whom Sammy still considered his mentor and who had done him great favors. Second, the rest of the team members and students would immediately hate him. Team members already hated management because of what they viewed as unfair profit distribution. For Sammy, this team and its management were like a sinking ship, and now they wanted him to become its captain. It was clear that if he accepted this offer, it would turn against him. The logical thing was to refuse. The best option actually would have been for him to establish a new team under a new company. But out of respect for Mr. M, he decided not to do this until this company collapsed or ended. Indeed, it wasn't long before Mr. M himself told his partners that he decided to withdraw from the company and that he could no longer manage it. After Mr. M's departure, his partners withdrew and the management dissolved. This happened around July 1993, meaning the company lasted for about a year and a half. At this point, Sammy decided to start forming his own team and established a company with his old colleagues Dan and Katie. Of course, they learned from Mr. M and his friends' mistakes, and the most important mistake was the unfair distribution of profits. Sammy and his friends were convinced that the main reason for the continuous losses was that the students didn't feel they were earning the percentage they deserved, which in turn led to their lack of focus in playing and ultimately their losses. This was the first mistake that needed to be corrected. Of course, they took the good things they learned from Mr. M, primarily that they should open a company and keep things organized, meaning there would be management, professional training, and everything would be written, legal, and calculated to the millimeter. But this time, the investors would be the students themselves. Each one would put in as much money as they could afford, and their profit share would be based on how much money they put in, even if this money was little. They could start with a little and gradually grow together. The most important thing was that everyone felt the situation was fair. This was the true path to continued success, and continuity was more important than quick profit. These were the principles upon which Sammy's team was founded, which would later become the most successful team in the history of Blackjack. Sammy's team continued to grow and expand over the next 4 to 5 years, and during these years, it included more than 60 players, and their total profits were estimated at more than $5 million, making them undisputedly the most successful Blackjack team in history. There were other teams that emerged even from other universities, but no one reached their level of success. Sammy and his colleagues still attribute most of the credit for their success to Mr. M. He laid the foundations. He drew their path, and he was the mind that cost all casinos millions. After these adventures, most of these students grew up and worked in technology companies or high-level educational institutions, and some founded technology companies and sold them for millions. Sammy himself founded multiple technology companies and sold them, becoming a millionaire of the highest order, and most team members achieved great success in their lives. And with that, we've reached the end of our story. As usual, I remind you to leave a like if you enjoyed the story, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here are also some other great stories you can watch if you haven't seen them before. Thank you for following. I'll see you in the next video, and goodbye.